Do you think you have to be good at every aspect of Quake to enjoy Quake then? I think you have to have the ability to get good if you want to. No way you just said that. Yes, but can you... See, I called this was gonna happen, by the way. The entire point... So for anyone asking about strafe jumping, can you strafe jump, etc., the entire point isn't to show you can strafe jump. Strafe jumping in a deathmatch will not exclusively win you a game, right? I'd like to see someone who strafe jumps the entire game and wins it. You still have to understand how to play Quake, and you still have to understand all of that, right? The only thing that the controller allows you to do, or the only thing that strafe jumping allows you to do, is get from point A to point B quicker. Quake, in general, does have a place on console, because I see too many times where people are like, oh no, Quake can't exist on console, you can't strafe jump. It's like, okay, the entire point of Quake isn't to strafe jump. Strafe jumps give you a huge advantage, though. I mean, in a deathmatch, realistically speaking, how often in a deathmatch game does strafe jumping really give you an advantage? In a generic, let's say 8v8 deathmatch, how much does it actually give you an advantage? Because I don't think, and I've done it on stream before, on Champions, that if you don't have to strafe jump to win games. And I think if you don't think it does, you're pretty new to Quake. I disagree. I think if you think strafe jumping is that fundamentally important, you've probably never really played anything other than deathmatch. I think if you think it doesn't affect duel, then you're wrong. I think strafe jumping definitely affects duel. But on a casual level, right, if you're playing Quake and you're strafe jumping in a deathmatch, the most that's going to net you is probably what? On the generous side, 10 kills? Which, granted, yeah, that can win a deathmatch game, right? I can't really argue that point, but I think at that point you're arguing you're arguing something that I'm not even talking about at that point. Yeah, but deathmatch is highly based on individual skill. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's almost like deathmatch isn't an indicator of how good someone is, and it shouldn't matter if you can strafe jump in deathmatch. Exactly, actually. It should, though. It's a part of the game, and one's movement ability can totally make or break the game of Quake. You take the aspect of the game out, it's not even Quake anymore. So you're saying that Quake's identity is based solely around strafe jumping? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're trying to argue? It's a huge part of it. I think in terms of legacy and in terms of actual movement tech and a tool as a player. So, okay, I see like where you're coming from. Yeah, in terms of legacy and history, I think strafe jumping is really important to Quake. And I don't want to like make it seem like I'm not valuing that, because I definitely value it. You have to allow for more than one type of input method, regardless of if there's crossplay or if it's balanced or if it's competitively viable or integral to the competitive gaming experience, or if there's even competitive integrity in allowing cross input play, right? I'm not trying to argue any of that. I'm trying to argue that at a casual base level, it is vastly more important to understand the fundamentals of how to move, how to use the weapons that are given to you, whether it's shotgun, railgun, rocket, plasma, or, you know, any other weapon that is within the Quake universe, be it chain gun, grenade launcher, tri-bolt. I'm trying to argue that those skills are vastly more important to a casual experience than strafe jumping will ever be. If your goal is to solely win and solely show that you understand the fundamentals of Quake, and that even at a competitive level, right? Because strafe jumping is integral to the competitive play of Quake, right? I think then yes, you are right. But I'm not trying to show that, right? Not everyone's goal in life is to be the best at Quake. Like, allowing controller players to experience champions, that should be up to them whether or not they like it, right? It shouldn't be up to the mouse and keyboard community of Quake to decide whether or not that's a good or bad experience. Problem with that is that devs start to nerf the gameplay around controller or for controller players. Why can't they just have separate builds of the game, right? Why can't they do that? Again, I think you're thinking I'm trying to argue for crossplay. I'm not trying to argue for crossplay. Quake was never a casual game. I completely disagree with that one. I don't think Quake was ever inherently competitive. And in fact, you even see John Carmack trying to argue that way back when. I don't know what his stance on competitive gaming now. I'm sure it's more prone towards the, or not prone. I'm sure it's more for the idea, right? But I don't think Quake was ever inherently competitive. Quake's initial intent was never to be a competitive game. You look at Quake 1, you look at Quake 2, not meant to be competitive. Even Quake 3, right, to some extent, was not meant to be a competitive game. Was it played competitively? Yes. Yes. 100% yes. But the intent of Quake was not to be in competitive. It was not to be a competitive game. It just so happened that the way Quake played made it super competitive. But that doesn't inherently make Quake competitive by nature. I think what makes Quake inherently, or what makes a game inherently competitive by nature is the overall perspective of the gaming industry. And a lot of people will argue that Quake is a competitive game, but I don't think it's inherently competitive, right? You look at Quake 1, it took how many years for that game to actually reach a top tier competitive level, right? Like if you look at how Thresh played versus someone who plays Quake 1 now, like how long did it take to get from that skill floor to that skill floor? You know what I mean? I think that also plays a big factor in if something is competitive or not inherently. For the sole intent of competing, you don't know what you're talking about? Thresh didn't play World. Thresh played QuakeNet. Where did I say he played Quake World? You can't compare Thresh to a Quake World player? Yeah, but you said Quake is inherently competitive. You take it back to the start. That's what inherently competitive means. Two different games with different movement. Again, I never argued otherwise. You're just making a bunch of wild assumptions that have absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about. Like, I honestly don't get what you're trying to argue right now. You're saying Quake is inherently competitive. I go back to when Quake released. You're saying that's not competitive? What? Let's take a look at Melee. Melee is a perfect example of my sort of argument. The current version that they use on Melee, I believe, is the 1.02 version or something like that. MTSC, PAL, etc. I believe it is the 1.02 version of Melee. And then they apply certain fixes like anti-stick drift and things like that. The base version of Melee, the gameplay itself, is not radically changed to the point where it is different movement styles or different things like that. That's where projects like Project M come into play. You look at what you're talking about, which is Quake World versus NetQuake, right? Like you said, two different things, but NetQuake is original Quake. That is what defines if a game is inherently competitive. Quake World was launched in 97, I believe, right? Like mid 97. NetQuake was never as competitive as Quake World. Well, thank you. You just agreed with me on that. Again, Quake is not inherently competitive. Quake is not Quake, the franchise, is not inherently a competitive game, right? It's when you change it. It's when you make additions to it. Is it competitive? There's a reason why a lot of people who play Quake Live, Quake 3, Quake 2, Quake 1 view Quake Champions is not inherently competitive, right? Like a lot of people from previous different versions of Quake do not think Champions is a competitive game, at least in that regard. Quake's base game is very competitive, but you just said NetQuake wasn't competitive. That is the first iteration of Quake in terms of multiplayer. Quake 1 started esports? I disagree. There were tournaments in the arcade era for games. Is NetQuake competitive? Slackaholic. Was Thresh a competitive player? Can I not compare Thresh to current day competitive Quake 1 players? You answered it in the chat itself. You literally said NetQuake and Quake World are two different things, which you are ding 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 correct. Again, you're not coming up with any arguments. You're just kind of disagreeing and not really saying anything that adds to the contrary. And besides, we got way off base anyways. This conversation completely started off as, does strafe jumping in deathmatch in a casual lobby, like if you don't care, right, does that win you games? I mean, the answer is obviously yes, but if you're in a casual lobby, it's like no one's going to care to strafe jump. You see it all the time in Champions. You see people not strafe jumping in casual deathmatch lobbies. I think you can do strafe jumping with controllers, and there are proof of concept videos out there. Can I personally do it? Never really used the controller before. So that should answer that question. Unless he can CPM frag on a controller, defrag on a controller, it's pointless. Yeah, but CPM... CPMA defrag. I don't even know how to answer that one, dude. Slackaholic is infamous. Probably thinks that Quake is comparable to chess. Yeah, he probably does, doesn't he? I think controllers do have their place in FPS games. I think if you argue against that, you're just trying to gatekeep at that point. I feel like you've lost to a controller player one too many times and you're blaming or you're trying to think that controllers are OP. Well, you can't claim skill if you rely on aim assist. Yeah, but what about the... Okay, so what about the controller FPS games that don't have aim assist then? Do you recognize them as skillful? Okay, I have a question for you then, Slackaholic. Do you believe... Just hear me out. So if I were to rocket jump right now, would you... What would your thoughts be? Do you think rocket jumping is not a useful skill? Right? Like, if I actually rocket jumped from bridge to rail, right? What would you think of that? I'm curious. It's very useful and important. So, if you did that on a controller, what do you think of that? Would you be like, ah, that's sick, dude? Can't do it as smoothly or accurate with analog stick? So what did I just do then? Is that not smooth? Nearly as much subtlety with an analog stick? Okay. But we're getting way off topic here for this argument. Yes, I agree you can't do it with subtlety, but I mean why does it matter if you're subtle about it, right? Like not everyone needs to be a master at movement to enjoy Quake. Okay. Do you think you have to be good at every aspect of Quake to enjoy Quake then? Well, let's get that out of the way. Please enlighten me. Do you actually think that you have to be good at Quake to actually enjoy Quake? I feel like if your answer is anything but no, and you can't beat someone like Rafa, then that is a completely invalid argument. I'd like to see you 1v1 Rafa and say yes on that. I think you have to have the ability to get good if you want to. No way you just said that. There is no way you just said you have to have the ability to get good to enjoy Quake. By that logic, the average everyday person who, just for argument's sake, because it's the latest Quake, who plays Champions every day, whether it's for 5 minutes or whether it's for 8 hours. I don't know anyone who plays Champions for 8 hours. Let me put that out there. By that logic, you are saying that the person who puts in 5 minutes a day and having fun with the game, not improving, just playing bots or playing deathmatch, you're saying they're not really enjoying Quake then. I want you to know the statement you just made is so incredibly subjective that there is no logical way you can argue that. There is just no way you can actually argue that. Whereas something like not strafe jumping in a deathmatch, you can definitely argue that. Because you can physically do that. You can't physically measure someone's ability to get good at a game. Getting good at a video game is not hard. It is not hard. Let me tell you that. Let me tell you that. If you put enough time and effort into pretty much any game, you could definitely be better than average, because that's what it pretty much means to be good at a game. Because the controller limits my ability in game. So what you're saying is you don't want to adapt to a new situation, and that's why you don't like it. Gotcha. I think a lot of people underestimate how strong a controller is in terms of what it can do. Can they can they beam someone in air with LG? Probably. I mean, that's a possibility. But can they strafe jump? No. They don't need to strafe jump. What if you just have good positioning to begin with? Strafe jumping doesn't give you the ability to position good. It just gives you the ability to get to point A to point B faster, essentially. So what if you're just good at positioning to begin with? Does that invalidate the skill of controller? can give you better positioning. Okay, yeah. But what if you already have that better positioning, right? How, you think strafe jumping, like, pretty much will always give you better positioning, right? Saying things like, you have to have the ability to get good at Quake to enjoy Quake, I feel like that's just fundamentally a flawed argument, because that's just such a subjective statement. Like, there's no way you can reliably argue that, I don't think. Right? There's no way to prove that. There's no way to really make an entire statement based on why you personally enjoy Quake like that, right? Like, I really feel like that's at that point, I don't know. I really don't know what else to say. If you don't agree with that, you're simply too new to Quake. Hey Slack, have you ever competed in Quake before? Any Quake? Can I search you up on Plus Forward? Let's see. Let's do this. This will be fun content. Plusforward.net. Let's use this, because this is usually like a good benchmark. Slackaholic. Oh, that's G. Okay, that doesn't come up. The Slackaholic. What did you compete by if you competed? Can you give me an alias? Would it not be on here? Like, where can I find a legitimate verified tournament that you played in, B? Because I can give you mine, right? I even played in Diabotical. Look, this is me. What's this? Diabotical Quake Champions. Let's see. Show results. It's my win-loss, 41-33. Teams are kind of irrelevant because these are just like 2v2 fun events I did. It's like, I don't know. I really don't know what you want me to tell you. Oh, are these team? Oh, some of them are. No, again, give me an alias. I want an alias right now from you. Because if you're saying all this stuff and you can't even provide me an alias that you competed in, then your credibility has just gone out the window, dude. And I know you're actually just trolling at this point. Like, you can't make these arguments and say you have to have the ability to get good and then never compete before. Never have placings. Never have good placings, right? Like, you can't make these arguments at that point. So what is an alias that you have competed in? If you can't give me that, then it ends right here. Sorry, you're just wrong at that point. So give me an alias. Slackaholic? The Slackaholic? Like, I need something here. I really do need something here to go off of. You're coming off as the self-righteous person that at the end of the day has never had a place, like, has ever placed top 5 within any tournament, whether it's online or LAN. And granted, LAN events are definitely a better indicator, but if you can't even give me an online tournament ranking, you're actually just a clown at that point. Because I'd like to be able to verify that you're actually good at Quake, you know? Just by your logic. Just by your logic. Give me an alias, dude. I'll sit here all day and wait. I'll put the stream on hold because this is better content to begin with. No, I mean, what it seems to me is Slackaholic is what people would refer to as like a really joke term as a Quake vet who will say that Quake is one of the hardest games ever and that it's just so much better than other games, but they have never competed in their life or have done anything competitive. So them making the claim that Quake is competitive is just to stroke their ego. Again, give me any alias that you've competed in tournaments or given me any proof. I will change my statement right around. If you show me and you can support your claim of you have to enjoy Quake or you have to be good at Quake or the ability to get good at Quake to enjoy Quake, I just want to know. I want to know any placement history or anything like that. Again, I think you're just a 40-year-old man who peaked in Quake I and absolutely cannot get over that fact, which is a damn shame. Oh, what I meant was, let me back it up real quick. Hold on. Yeah, dude. Nice. Yeah, dude. Nice. As soon as I start to prove you can strafe jump on controller, you backstep real quick, dude. Nice one. Hey, that's the mark of a true Quake player, let me tell you. What I meant was, that is backing up, by the way. Just as a heads up.